The gunslinger rode into Taylorsville, Utah on a January morning in 1878, his black coat dusted with snow. And every person on that frozen street knew, without being told, that Quinton Steele was a man who never let anyone close enough to touch him. He dismounted outside the saloon with movements so precise they seemed calculated to avoid even accidental contact, tying his horse to the post without brushing against the animal more than necessary. The townspeople had heard stories about the cold cowboy from Colorado, whispers that followed him like shadows. Some said he had killed a dozen men in fair fights. Others claimed he had watched his entire family burn and emerged from that fire unable to feel anything at all. What everyone agreed on was this: Quinton Steele never shook hands, never clapped a shoulder in friendship, never embraced anyone, and the few foolish souls who had tried to touch him found themselves staring down the barrel of his revolver before they could blink. The saloon door swung open and Quinton stepped inside, his gray eyes scanning the room with the wariness of a wolf in unfamiliar territory. The bartender, a heavy-set man named Dutch, had been warned by the previous establishment that Steele would be passing through. Dutch slid a whiskey across the bar, careful to leave it at the edge so Quinton could pick it up without their hands meeting. "Rooms upstairs," Dutch said quietly. "Third door on the right, keys in the lock." Quinton nodded once, left coins on the bar without a word, and took his drink. He stood at the far end of the room where he could watch both the door and the windows, a habit born from years of survival. The other patrons gave him a wide berth, sensing something dangerous in his stillness. That was when Josephine Orton walked through the door, and everything Quinton Steele thought he knew about himself began to unravel. She wore a dark blue traveling dress that had seen better days, her auburn hair pinned up beneath a practical hat, and she carried a worn leather satchel that looked heavy enough to contain everything she owned. Her face was pale, whether from cold or exhaustion Quinton could not tell, but her green eyes held a determination that made her seem taller than her actual height. She approached the bar with quick, purposeful steps. "I need a room," she said to Dutch, her voice carrying the refined accent of someone educated back east. "Just for tonight. I can pay." Dutch shifted uncomfortably. "Miss, we don't usually rent to unmarried ladies traveling alone. Folks might talk." "Then folks should find more productive ways to occupy their time," Josephine replied sharply. "I have been traveling for 3 days straight. My stagecoach broke an axle 15 miles south of here, and I walked the last 5 miles through snow because the driver decided getting drunk was more important than fixing the wheel. I am cold, I am exhausted, and I am in no mood to sleep in a stable because of small-minded gossip. Now, do you have a room or don't you?" Something flickered in Quinton's chest, an unfamiliar sensation like the first crack in river ice during spring thaw. He watched as Dutch hemmed and hawed, clearly moved by her plight but equally afraid of what the town's more conservative residents might say. Quinton found himself speaking before he had consciously decided to do so. "She can have my room," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "I will sleep in the stable." Every head in the saloon turned toward him. Josephine's gaze found his across the dimly lit room, and for a moment that seemed to stretch beyond its natural boundaries, they simply looked at each other. Then she shook her head. "I cannot ask you to do that," she said. "That would be an enormous imposition." "You did not ask," Quinton replied. "I offered." "Why?" The question was direct, almost challenging. Quinton did not have an answer that made sense, even to himself. He drained his whiskey and set the glass down with deliberate care. "Because you look like you need it more than I do." Josephine studied him for a long moment, taking in his black coat, his guns, the careful distance he maintained from everyone around him. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said. "That is very kind." Kind. The word landed strangely in Quinton's ears. No one had called him kind in years. He retrieved the key from upstairs and brought it down, placing it on the bar between them rather than handing it to her directly. She noticed the gesture, her brow furrowing slightly, but she took the key without comment. "There is a dining room next door," Dutch offered, seemingly relieved that the situation had resolved itself. "Mrs. Chen serves hot meals until 8 o'clock. "Thank you," Josephine said again. She glanced at Quinton once more, something curious and uncertain in her expression, then headed upstairs. Quinton walked out into the cold evening air, his breath forming white clouds. The stable was warm enough with the horses providing heat, and he had slept in far worse places. He made a bed in the hay, using his saddle as a pillow, but sleep evaded him. He kept seeing those green eyes, that tired but unbowed defiance, the way she had challenged him with a single word. Why? He did not have an answer. That troubled him more than it should have. Morning came with weak winter sunlight filtering through the stable slats. Quinton rose, brushed hay from his clothes, and stepped outside to find Taylorsville covered in fresh snow. The main street was already busy with wagons and pedestrians going about their business. He was heading toward the water pump to wash when he saw Josephine emerge from the saloon, her satchel over her shoulder. She spotted him immediately and changed direction, walking toward him with that same purposeful stride. Quinton felt his muscles tense, an automatic response to someone entering his space. "I wanted to thank you properly," Josephine said when she reached him. "That room had an actual bed and a stove. I slept better than I have in weeks." She paused, then extended her hand. "Josephine Orton." Quinton stared at her outstretched hand, as if it were a coiled rattlesnake. The tension in his shoulders became visible, his jaw tightening. For a moment, he considered walking away without a word, maintaining the walls he had built so carefully around himself. But something in Josephine's open expression, in the simple, genuine gratitude she offered, made those walls feel less like protection and more like a prison. Slowly, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to maintain distance, Quinton reached out and took her hand. The touch sent a shock through his entire system. Her hand was small in his, her skin cold from the winter air, but somehow warming quickly against his palm. He felt every point of contact with startling clarity, her fingers wrapping gently around his, the soft skin, the delicate bones, the pulse beating in her wrist. His breath caught in his throat. It had been so long since he had touched another person with anything other than violence that he had forgotten what it could feel like, what it should feel like. "Quinton Steele," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. They stood there in the snow-covered street, hands clasped, while the world continued around them. Quinton knew he should let go. Every fiber of his being that had been trained for survival told him to release her hand and step back. But he did not want to. For the first time in 8 years, since the day he had crawled from the burning wreckage of his childhood home with his parents and sister dead inside, he did not want to be alone. Josephine seemed to sense something profound in the moment. Her eyes widened slightly, searching his face with new understanding. She did not pull away. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. Quinton realized his hand was trembling. He had faced down armed men without flinching, had walked through gunfights with steady nerves, but this simple human contact had shaken him to his core. He forced himself to release her hand, immediately missing the warmth. "I am fine," he said, though they both knew it was not entirely true. "You are not accustomed to people touching you," Josephine observed. It was not a question. No, Why not? There it was again, that direct challenge wrapped in a single word. Quinton found himself answering with more honesty than he had shown anyone in years. Because it is easier to keep moving when you have nothing to hold on to, he said. Josephine tilted her head, considering this. That sounds like a very lonely way to live. Lonely is safe. Safe is not the same as living. They stood in silence for a moment, the snow falling gently around them. Finally, Josephine shifted her satchel and glanced down the street. "I need to find the telegraph office," she said. "I am supposed to be in Salt Lake City by the end of the week. I am taking a position as a schoolteacher there. I need to wire ahead and explain why I will be late." "The telegraph office is 2 buildings down on the left," Quinton said. Then, surprising himself again, he added, "When does the next stage leave?" "Not until tomorrow afternoon, according to the schedule Dutch showed me. You will need somewhere to stay another night." Josephine smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "Are you offering me your room again, Mr. Steele?" "Quinton," he corrected. "And yes." "Then I accept, Quinton. But only if you agree to have dinner with me this evening. I hate eating alone, and you did me a considerable kindness. The least I can do is buy you a meal." Every instinct told him to refuse. Dinner meant conversation, meant time spent in close proximity, meant the possibility of more contact, more connection, more risk. But when he looked at Josephine's face, at the hope and genuine friendliness in her expression, he found he could not say no. "All right," he agreed. Her smile widened. "Excellent. Shall we say 6 o'clock at Mrs. Chen's dining room?" Quinton nodded, and Josephine walked away toward the telegraph office, leaving him standing in the snow with his hand still tingling from where she had touched him. The day passed with strange slowness. Quinton attended to his horse, checked his supplies, cleaned his guns with meticulous care. These were familiar rituals, comforting in their routine. But underneath everything, anticipation hummed through his veins like electricity through telegraph wires. He caught himself thinking about Josephine at odd moments, wondering about her story, about what had brought an educated Eastern woman to the rough territory of Utah. At 10 minutes before 6, he walked to Mrs. Chen's dining room. The establishment was small but clean, with red paper lanterns hanging from the ceiling and the warm smell of cooking food filling the air. Mrs. Chen herself, a tiny Chinese woman with sharp eyes and quick hands, greeted him at the door. "You are Mr. Steele," she said. It was not a question. "The young lady is already here. She said you would come." Josephine sat at a corner table, her hair now freed from its pins and falling in loose waves around her shoulders. She had changed into a different dress, this one a deep green that matched her eyes. When she saw Quinton, she waved him over. He sat across from her, carefully positioning his chair so his back was to the wall and he could see the door. Old habits. "I was worried you might change your mind," Josephine admitted. "I gave my word," Quinton replied simply. "Yes, but I practically bullied you into it. I have a terrible habit of being too forward. My mother used to despair of me ever learning proper manners." She said this lightly, but Quinton detected an old sadness beneath the words. "Your mother," he said. "Is she back east?" "She died 3 years ago," Josephine said. "Consumption." "My father followed her 6 months later. The doctors said it was pneumonia, but I think it was really a broken heart. They were very much in love." "I am sorry." "Thank you. It is why I am going to Salt Lake City, actually. After they died, I had nothing keeping me in Boston. I wanted a fresh start, somewhere I could make my own way. Teaching seemed like a worthy pursuit." Mrs. Chen arrived with bowls of steaming noodle soup, setting them down with quick efficiency. The food smelled incredible, and Quinton realized he had not eaten since yesterday. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the warmth of the soup spreading through his chest. "What about you?" Josephine asked eventually. "Where are you from, Colorado, originally? And what brings you to Utah?" Quinton hesitated. He had deflected this question 100 times with 100 different people, always keeping his answers vague and uninformative. But something about Josephine's open curiosity, the way she had shared her own story so freely, made him want to offer something real in return. "I am a hired gun," he said bluntly. "A ranch owner in Nevada sent word that he needs help dealing with rustlers. I am on my way there now." He watched for her reaction, expecting disgust or fear or judgment. Instead, Josephine simply nodded thoughtfully. "That must be dangerous work," she said. "It is. Is it what you want to do, or what you feel you have to do?" The question struck deeper than she probably intended. Quinton set down his spoon, considering how to answer. "I am good at it," he said finally. "I am fast with a gun, faster than most, and I do not hesitate. Those skills are valuable in certain situations." "That is not what I asked." "No," Quinton admitted. "It is not." They looked at each other across the table, and Quinton felt that same strange crackling in the air that had existed between them since she had first taken his hand. He had the unsettling feeling that Josephine could see straight through all his carefully constructed defenses to the lonely, damaged man underneath. "I wanted to be a carpenter," he said suddenly, the words escaping before he could stop them. "When I was young, before everything changed. My grandfather was a master craftsman. He could build anything. I used to help him in his workshop, learning how to measure and cut and join. I thought I would make furniture, beautiful things that would last for generations." He stopped, surprised by how much he had revealed. "What changed?" Josephine asked gently. "Fire," Quinton said flatly. "My parents' house burned down when I was 17. They were inside. My sister, too. I tried to go in after them, but the flames were too hot, too fast. By the time I could get inside, they were gone." Josephine's hand moved across the table, covering his before he realized what she was doing. This time Quinton did not startle. The warmth of her touch grounded him, pulled him back from the dark memory. "I am so sorry," she said, and he could hear the genuine grief in her voice. "That is a terrible thing to survive. After that, I did not want to build things anymore," Quinton continued, surprised to find himself still talking. "Everything felt temporary, fragile. What was the point of creating something that could be destroyed so easily? So I learned to shoot instead. Learned to be the one doing the destroying. It felt more honest somehow." "But you are not destroying things now," Josephine pointed out. "You are protecting a ranch, protecting people, maybe, definitely." She squeezed his hand gently. "You gave me your room, Quinton. You did not have to do that. You could have stayed silent and let me figure out my own situation. But you helped me because it was the right thing to do. That says something about who you are underneath all this armor you wear." Quinton looked down at their joined hands. Her skin was pale against his sun-weathered tan. He marveled at how natural it felt now, how the initial shock had faded into something comfortable and right. "You should eat your soup before it gets cold," he said, deflecting because he did not know how to respond to her words. Josephine laughed, a bright sound that drew smiles from the other diners. She released his hand and picked up her spoon again, but the warmth of her touch lingered. They talked through the rest of the meal, the conversation flowing more easily than Quinton could have imagined. Josephine told him about Boston, about the schools she had attended, and the authors she loved and her plans for her new students in Salt Lake City. She spoke with passion and intelligence, painting pictures with her words that made Quinton see things he had never experienced himself. In turn, he found himself sharing fragments of his life. The towns he had passed through, the vast beauty of the Colorado mountains, the strange sense of freedom that came from owning nothing but what he could carry. He did not talk about the men he had killed or the violence that had marked his path, but Josephine seemed to understand those gaps without needing them filled. When they finally left the dining room, the night sky was clear and filled with stars. The temperature had dropped sharply, their breath fogging in the cold air. They walked slowly back toward the saloon, neither seeming eager to end the evening. "Thank you for dinner," Quinton said, "and for the conversation. I have not talked that much in years." "Thank you for agreeing to it," Josephine replied. "I have not felt this comfortable with someone in a very long time." She paused at the door to the saloon, then turned to face him fully. "Quinton, can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Earlier today, when I shook your hand, you looked terrified. Why?" Quinton considered lying, deflecting, changing the subject. Instead, he told her the truth. "Because I have spent 8 years making sure no one gets close enough to matter," he said. "I don't let people touch me because touch creates connection, and connection leads to caring, and caring leads to loss. I learned that lesson very thoroughly. But when you held my hand today, I realized how much I have been missing, how much I have denied myself in the name of safety. And that terrified me more than any gunfight ever has." Josephine's eyes shimmered in the lamplight spilling from the saloon windows. "Quinton, life is loss. Everyone we love, we will eventually lose one way or another. That is the cost of being human. But the alternative is existing without ever truly living, and that seems like an even greater tragedy." "You sound very wise for someone so young." "I am 24, she said with a slight smile. "Plenty old enough to have learned a few hard truths. How old are you?" 26. "Then we are both old enough to know that tomorrow is not guaranteed. Which is why I am going to do something very forward again, and I hope you will forgive me if I am misreading this situation." Before Quinton could ask what she meant, Josephine stepped closer and took both his hands in hers. She looked up at him, her face serious and tender at once. "I am getting on that stage coach tomorrow afternoon," she said. "And you are riding off to Nevada. We will probably never see each other again, but I want you to know that meeting you has meant something to me. This conversation, this connection, it has reminded me why I am making this journey, why I am choosing hope over fear. I hope it has meant something to you too." Quinton's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked down at their joined hands, at her face tilted up toward his, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. The walls he had built did not crumble all at once, but cracks spread through them like lightning across a summer sky. "It has," he said roughly. "Josephine, I don't want to let go of your hands." She smiled, her eyes brightening. "Then don't. Not yet." They stood there in the cold night air, holding onto each other while the sounds of the saloon drifted around them. Quinton felt the warmth of her skin seeping into his, chasing away not just the winter chill but years of loneliness he had pretended not to feel. When he finally, reluctantly, released her hands, he felt the loss like a physical ache. "Good night, Quinton," Josephine said softly. "Good night." She went inside, and Quinton walked back to the stable in a daze. He lay in the hay again, but this time sleep came easily, filled with dreams of green eyes and warm hands and possibilities he had long ago stopped imagining. Morning arrived too quickly. Quinton rose early and went to the general store, where he purchased supplies for his journey. The storekeeper, a talkative man named Parsons, wrapped his purchases while providing unsolicited commentary on the weather and local gossip. Quinton barely heard him. His mind was already miles down the road, riding toward Nevada and away from Taylorsville, away from Josephine. The thought settled in his chest like a stone. He paid for his supplies and walked out, nearly colliding with Josephine herself on the boardwalk. "Oh," she said, steadying herself with a hand on his arm. "Good morning. Good morning." Quinton was acutely aware of her hand on his sleeve, the casual touch that would have been unthinkable 2 days ago. "Are you prepared for the stage?" "As ready as I will ever be," Josephine said. "Though I have to admit, I am not looking forward to another long journey in a cramped coach." She glanced at his supply bundle. "You are leaving today too?" "Yes. Soon." They stood awkwardly for a moment, the easy conversation of the previous night harder to find in the harsh morning light. The reality of their separate paths stretched between them like an unbridgeable canyon. "Well," Josephine said finally, forcing brightness into her voice, "I suppose this is goodbye then." "I suppose so. Thank you again for everything. The room, the dinner, the conversation. It was all more than I expected to find in a place like this. You're welcome." Another pause, heavier than the first. Josephine bit her lower lip, clearly struggling with something. Then she seemed to make a decision. "Quinton, can I write to you? I know we barely know each other, but I would like to continue our conversation, even if only through letters." The offer caught him completely off guard. "I don't have an address," he said. "I move around too much." "What about the ranch in Nevada? Could I send letters there?" Quinton considered this. The job would probably last at least a few months, maybe longer. It would be the closest thing to a permanent address he had maintained in years. "The Double R Ranch outside Carson City," he said. "Care of Quinton Steele. Yes, you could send letters there." Josephine's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Then I will. I cannot promise they will be interesting, but I will write about my students and life in Salt Lake City, and you can write back about Nevada and whether you have reconsidered your stance on touching people." Despite everything, Quinton found himself smiling. "I will try." "Good." She extended her hand one more time. "Until we meet again, Quinton Steele." He took her hand, and this time the contact felt both familiar and precious. He held on longer than a simple handshake required, memorizing the feeling. "Until we meet again, Josephine Orton." She walked away toward the stage depot, and Quinton watched her go, fighting the overwhelming urge to call her back. He told himself he was being foolish, that she was just a woman he had known for less than 2 days, that this hollow feeling in his chest would pass as soon as he got on the trail. He told himself these things, but he did not believe a single one of them. Quinton collected his horse from the stable, secured his supplies, and mounted up. He rode out of Taylorsville heading west, the winter sun climbing slowly into a pale blue sky. The trail stretched before him, familiar and lonely. He had ridden similar trails for years, always moving, never stopping long enough to put down roots. It had been exactly what he wanted, what he needed. But now, for the first time, it felt wrong. The day passed in a blur of snow-dusted landscape and scattered pines. Quinton stopped briefly at noon to rest his horse and eat some jerky, then continued on. By evening he had covered nearly 30 miles, putting significant distance between himself and Taylorsville. He made camp in a small clearing sheltered from the wind, built a fire, and sat staring into the flames while his mind replayed every moment with Josephine, her smile, her direct questions, the way she had held his hand without hesitation or fear, the warmth in her eyes when she looked at him, as if she saw something worthwhile beneath the cold exterior he showed the world. Quinton pulled out his bedroll but did not lie down. Instead, he sat with his back against a tree trunk, watching the fire burn down to embers while a single thought circled endlessly through his mind. What if loneliness was not actually safety? What if it was just loneliness? The night stretched on, cold and clear. Quinton barely slept. By the time dawn broke, he had made his decision. He broke camp quickly, saddled his horse, and turned back east, toward Taylorsville, toward Josephine. The ride back felt both endless and too short. Quinton pushed his horse harder than he should have, arriving in Taylorsville just after noon with his mount lathered and blowing hard. He went straight to the stage depot, his heart pounding. The depot clerk, an elderly man with spectacles, looked up from his ledger. "Help you?" "The stage to Salt Lake City," Quinton said urgently. "Has it left yet?" "Left about an hour ago, right on schedule." The disappointment was crushing. Quinton stood frozen, trying to process this setback and what it meant. "You looking for someone who was on it?" the clerk asked. "Yes, a woman. Auburn hair, green eyes, traveling alone. Her name is Josephine Orton." The clerk consulted his ledger. "Yep, she was on the manifest. Pretty lady, very polite, seemed excited about getting to Salt Lake." He peered at Quinton over his spectacles. "You could catch up to them if you rode hard. Stage has to stop at Bear Creek Station around 3 o'clock to change horses. That's only about 15 miles north." Quinton was already moving toward the door. "Thank you." He gave his exhausted horse to the stable keeper with instructions to care for it properly and payment to ensure the man followed through. Then he bought a fresh mount, a strong gray gelding with good legs, and set off at a gallop. The road to Bear Creek Station wound through rolling hills and scattered forest. Quinton rode like a man possessed, the gray gelding eating up the miles with steady determination. His mind raced with what he would say when he saw Josephine again, how he would explain this sudden reversal, whether she would even want him to follow her. He did not have answers to any of those questions. He only knew that letting her ride out of his life without a fight was the worst kind of cowardice, and he had been a coward for far too long. Bear Creek Station appeared around a bend in the road, a rough collection of buildings clustered around a central barn. Quinton spotted the stagecoach immediately, the driver and station keeper changing out the team while passengers stretched their legs nearby. And there, standing slightly apart from the others, was Josephine. She had her back to the road, looking out at the surrounding hills. Quinton dismounted and tied his horse to the rail, his legs unsteady after the hard ride. He walked toward her, suddenly uncertain now that the moment had arrived. "Josephine," he called. She turned, her expression cycling rapidly through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been joy. "Quinton, what are you doing here? Did something happen? Are you all right?" He stopped a few feet away, acutely aware of the other passengers watching with undisguised curiosity. "I am fine. I need to talk to you. But you left this morning. I saw you ride out. I came back." "Why?" There it was again, that single word that demanded honesty. Quinton took a deep breath, aware that he was about to leap off a cliff with no idea what lay at the bottom. "Because I have spent 8 years telling myself that being alone was the only way to stay safe," he said. "I convinced myself that not touching anyone, not connecting with anyone was strength. But it was not strength. It was just fear. And then you held my hand and everything I thought I knew about myself became a lie." Josephine's eyes had gone very wide. "Quinton, I don't understand." "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I rode 15 miles in the wrong direction before I realized I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I am saying that I turned around and rode 30 miles back to catch a stage I should have let leave without me. I am saying that I have known you for less than 2 days, which is not enough time to feel this way about someone, but I do anyway." He paused, then forced himself to continue. "I am saying that I do not want to let go of your hand. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. And I know that makes me sound insane, but it is the truest thing I have said in years." The stagecoach driver called out, "5 minutes, folks. Finish your business and get aboard." Josephine did not seem to hear him. She stared at Quinton with an expression he could not read, emotions flickering across her face too quickly to identify. The silence stretched, agonizing and eternal. Then she stepped forward and took his hands in hers, just as she had done outside the saloon. "You rode 30 miles to catch a stagecoach," she said slowly, as if testing the words, "because you did not want to say goodbye. Yes. That is possibly the most romantic thing anyone has ever done for me. It felt like the only thing I could do." Josephine laughed, the sound bright with tears she was blinking back. "Quinton, I have been sitting in that miserable coach all morning trying to convince myself that what I was feeling was just foolishness brought on by exhaustion and circumstance. That there was no possible way I could have developed such strong feelings for a man I barely know. And did you convince yourself? Not even remotely." She squeezed his hands tighter. "What do we do now? I have a teaching position waiting for me in Salt Lake City. You have a job in Nevada. Our lives are going in completely different directions. So we change direction," Quinton said. "Or we figure out how to make the same direction work. I don't have the answers, Josephine. All I know is that I spent years running from connection, and now that I have found it, I am not willing to give it up without at least trying." The driver called again, more insistently. "Stage is leaving, miss. You coming or staying?" Josephine looked at the stagecoach, then back at Quinton. He could see the war happening behind her eyes, duty and responsibility battling against something newer and more fragile. He wanted to tell her he would wait, that they could figure this out, but he stayed silent. This had to be her choice. Finally, Josephine turned toward the driver. "I need my bag," she called. "I am not continuing to Salt Lake City." "You sure about that, miss? Next stage won't come through for another week." "I am sure." The driver shrugged and retrieved her satchel from the luggage rack. Josephine walked over to collect it, spoke briefly with the driver, then returned to where Quinton stood rooted in shock. "I will have to send a telegram explaining that I will not be accepting the position," she said matter-of-factly. "That is going to be an awkward conversation. And I have no idea what I will do for work now, but I figured those were problems I could solve later." "Josephine, are you certain?" Quinton asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I did not come here to make you give up your plans. I am not giving them up. I am changing them." "There is a difference." She smiled up at him, her eyes bright. "Besides, you are not the only one who has been running, Quinton. I told myself I was going to Salt Lake City for a fresh start, but really I was just putting distance between myself and everything I had lost. Running toward something is not the same as running toward anything that matters. And this, whatever this is between us, it matters." The stagecoach rolled away in a cloud of dust, leaving them standing alone in the station yard. Quinton was still holding Josephine's hands, and he had no intention of letting go any time soon. "What now?" he asked. "Well, I suppose we should figure out where we are actually going," Josephine said practically. "Do you still need to go to Nevada for that ranch job?" Quinton considered this. The job would pay well, but it was not the only employment available in the territory. And more importantly, taking a position that would put him in daily danger suddenly seemed far less appealing when he had something to live for beyond simple survival. "No," he said. "I can send word that I am not available. There are other hired guns, other men who can protect that ranch. I don't need to be one of them." "Then what do you want to do?" It was the same question she had asked at dinner, but this time Quinton had an answer. "I want to build things again," he said. "I told you about my grandfather, about wanting to be a carpenter. Maybe it is time I tried that again. There are towns all through this territory that need skilled craftsmen. We could find one that needs a carpenter and a teacher, start fresh somewhere together." "We," Josephine repeated softly. "I like the sound of that. So do I." They stood smiling at each other like fools until the station keeper emerged from the barn and cleared his throat pointedly. "You two lovebirds planning to stand in my yard all day? Because if not, There's a perfectly good bench inside where you can sit and figure out your next move." They went inside, settling on the bench while the station keeper went about his business with obvious amusement. Quinton kept Josephine's hand in his, marveling at how quickly something so foreign had become essential. "We should be practical about this," Josephine said, though her tone suggested she was not feeling particularly practical at the moment. "We need to find a town that has opportunities for both of us. And we should probably get married fairly quickly, because traveling together without being married will cause all sorts of gossip and difficulty." "Married," Quinton repeated, the word both terrifying and exhilarating. "Unless you have objections to the idea." "No objections. Just surprise. I never thought I would marry anyone. And I never thought I would accept a marriage proposal from someone I have known for less than 48 hours, Josephine said with a laugh. "But here we are, throwing caution to the wind like characters in a dime novel." "For the record, I am proposing," Quinton said seriously. "Properly, I mean. Josephine Orton, will you marry me?" "Yes, Quinton Steele, I will." They sealed the agreement with smiles and clasped hands, then set about making actual plans. The station keeper, who introduced himself as Frank Bellamy, proved surprisingly helpful. He had lived in Utah Territory for 20 years and knew most of the towns within a 100-mile radius. "If you want my advice," Frank said, leaning against the counter, "head up to Cedar Falls. It's about 40 miles northeast of here, up in the mountain valleys. Pretty little town, maybe 300 people. They have been trying to get a proper schoolhouse built for years, and I heard their teacher moved away last summer. They have been making do with lessons in the church, but it is not ideal. And for carpentry work, well, the whole territory is growing fast. A skilled carpenter could make a good living almost anywhere, but especially in a place like Cedar Falls where they are trying to become more established." Quinton looked at Josephine. "What do you think?" "I think Cedar Falls sounds perfect," she said. "How long would it take us to get there?" "On horseback with 2 riders. 2 days if you take it steady. There's another station halfway there at Mountain View where you could spend the night." Frank studied them with shrewd eyes. "You will need a second horse, though. You planning to share that gray you rode in on?" "No," Quinton said. "We will buy a horse here if you have one for sale, and supplies for the journey." They spent the rest of the afternoon making preparations. Frank sold them a sturdy mare that he claimed was gentle but reliable, along with a saddle and tack. Quinton bought camping supplies, food, and warmer clothes for Josephine, since her traveling outfit was designed for stagecoach comfort rather than horseback riding in mountain cold. By the time the sun started setting, they were as ready as they could be. Frank offered them beds in the station's small guest quarters, which Quinton accepted gratefully. He took one room, Josephine the other, propriety maintained for one more night. But before they retired, they sat together on the bench outside, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The temperature had dropped sharply and Josephine shivered despite her new coat. Without thinking, Quinton put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. She stiffened in surprise, then relaxed against him with a contented sigh. "This is nice," she murmured. Quinton rested his cheek against the top of her head, breathing in the faint scent of soap and something floral from her hair. The embrace felt both monumental and natural, another wall crumbling away. "I am glad you did not get on that stage," he said quietly. "So am I. Though I have to admit, part of me is terrified. We are making enormous decisions based on feelings we barely understand. What if we get to Cedar Falls and realize we have made a terrible mistake?" "Then we will figure that out together," Quinton said. "But I do not think it is a mistake, Josephine. When I held your hand yesterday, I felt something I had not felt since before the fire. Like maybe there was still a life worth living beyond just surviving day to day." You gave me that. However this turns out, I will always be grateful for it." Josephine turned in his embrace to look up at him. In the starlight, her eyes were luminous and deep. "Kiss me," she whispered. Quinton's breath caught. He had not kissed anyone in 8 years, had not allowed himself that kind of vulnerability. But when Josephine tilted her face up to his, trust and hope written in every line of her expression, he found he could deny her nothing. He kissed her gently, carefully, as if she might shatter. Her lips were soft and warm, and when she kissed him back, it felt like coming home after a long exile. The kiss deepened, weeks of loneliness and years of isolation melting away in the warmth of her response. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Josephine smiled. "Well," she said, slightly breathless, "that was definitely worth waiting for." Quinton laughed, surprised by the sound coming from his own throat. "Yes, it was." They sat together a while longer, holding each other against the cold before finally retiring to their separate rooms. Quinton lay awake for a long time, still feeling the phantom warmth of Josephine's kiss, still marveling at the strange and wonderful turn his life had taken. Morning came bright and cold. They set out early. Quinton on the gray gelding and Josephine on the mare Frank had sold them. The trail to Mountain View wound through spectacular country, climbing gradually into foothills where pine forests grew thick, and the air smelled of resin and snow. They rode side by side when the trail allowed, talking easily about everything and nothing. Josephine told him about her favorite books, about teaching methods she hoped to try, about her dreams for the kind of classroom she wanted to create. Quinton found himself sharing more stories from his childhood, memories of his grandfather's workshop that he had not allowed himself to think about in years. "What was your favorite thing to build?" Josephine asked as they paused to rest the horses near a frozen stream. "Boxes," Quinton said, smiling at the memory. "I know that sounds simple, but there is an art to making a perfect box. The joints have to be precise, the lid has to fit just right, and if you really want to show off, you include a secret compartment. My grandfather could make boxes so clever that even knowing there was a hidden space, you could not find it without knowing the trick. Did you ever finish one? A box with a secret compartment?" "Once. I gave it to my sister for her birthday, just a few weeks before the fire. I had carved flowers on the lid, roses like the ones my mother grew in the garden. Emma loved it. She kept all her treasures in there, letters from her friends and ribbons and little tokens." His voice faltered. "It burned with everything else." Josephine reached across the space between their horses and took his hand. "Maybe you could build another one," she said softly. "Not to replace it, because that would be impossible, but to honor the memory of that skill and the love you put into that gift." "Maybe," Quinton agreed. "I would like that." They reached Mountain View Station as the sun dipped toward the horizon. The station keeper, a jovial woman named Mrs. Patterson, had rooms available and served them a hearty meal of venison stew and fresh bread. Over dinner, they mentioned their plans to head to Cedar Falls. "Good choice," Mrs. Patterson approved. "I know the mayor up there, Samuel Garrett. Good man, fair-minded. The town's been growing steady the past few years, lots of families moving in. They would be happy to have both a teacher and a carpenter, I am sure of it." "Do you know if there is a preacher in Cedar Falls?" Josephine asked. "We are hoping to get married soon after we arrive." Mrs. Patterson beamed. "Oh, you are newlyweds. Well, congratulations to you both. Yes, Cedar Falls has Reverend Thomas. He has been there for years, very nice fellow. He will marry you right and proper." That night, lying in her borrowed bed, Josephine thought about the enormity of what she was doing. In the space of 3 days, she had abandoned a secure teaching position, committed herself to a man she barely knew, and set off into the wilderness with nothing but hope and faith to guide her. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt more alive than she had in years. She thought about Quinton, about the careful way he had opened up to her, sharing pieces of a past he clearly found painful. She thought about the way he looked at her, as if she were something precious and fragile and worth protecting. And she thought about his hands, those calloused, dangerous hands that had touched her with such gentleness, such desperate longing for connection. Josephine had not been lying when she told him she believed in choosing hope over fear. She just had not expected to be testing that philosophy quite so dramatically. The next day's ride brought them higher into the mountains. The air grew thinner and colder, the snow deeper. But the scenery was breathtaking. Vast expanses of white broken by dark green pines and the occasional glimpse of wildlife. They saw elk grazing in a meadow, a fox darting between trees, and once in the distance, what might have been a black bear lumber into the forest. Josephine proved to be a better rider than Quinton had expected, handling her mare with competence and even grace. When he commented on this, she laughed. "My father believed young ladies should have practical skills," she explained. "He made sure I learned to ride properly, not just side saddle in a park but actual riding. He said you never knew when you might need to get somewhere quickly." "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was. I miss him terribly, and my mother too. But I think they would approve of this of us. They believed in following your heart, even when it seemed impractical." "I hope you are right," Quinton said, "because this is about as impractical as it gets." They crested a final ridge as afternoon light turned golden, and there below them, nestled in a valley between snow-capped peaks, lay Cedar Falls. The town was larger than Quinton had expected, with a main street lined with businesses and houses spreading out in neat rows beyond. A church steeple rose at one end, and he could see what looked like a mill near the river that presumably gave the town its name. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and even from this distance, the place had an air of prosperity and permanence. "It's beautiful," Josephine breathed. "Yes," Quinton agreed, though he was looking at her rather than the town. They rode down into Cedar Falls as the sun set, drawing curious but not unfriendly looks from the people they passed. Quinton steered them toward the general store, which seemed like the best place to get their bearings and information. The store was warm and well-stocked, its shelves holding everything from dry goods to farming equipment. A man in his 50s stood behind the counter, gray-haired and spectacled, radiating competence and curiosity in equal measure. "Evening, folks," he said pleasantly. "Welcome to Cedar Falls. I'm Martin Cooper. I run this establishment. What can I do for you?" "We are looking for information about the town," Quinton said, "specifically about whether there might be opportunities for a carpenter and a school teacher." Cooper's eyebrows rose. "Well now, that is fortuitous timing. We have been without a proper teacher since last summer, and while my wife has been doing her best to educate the children in our church, it is not a permanent solution. As for carpentry, the mayor has been talking about expanding the town hall and building a real schoolhouse for months. He has had trouble finding anyone with the right skills." He looked between them with growing interest. "You two together, we are engaged," Josephine said. "We are hoping to marry soon and settle here if the town would have us." "I don't see why not, but you should talk to Mayor Garrett. His house is the large white one at the end of Main Street. Can't miss it. He will want to meet you both, I am sure." Cooper paused, then added, "If you need a place to stay tonight, the boarding house is 2 doors down. Mrs. Fletcher runs it, and she keeps clean rooms at fair prices." They thanked Cooper and headed for the boarding house, where Mrs. Fletcher, a bustling woman with kind eyes, was happy to rent them rooms. Josephine took one on the second floor while Quinton took another on the first, maintaining appearances until they could be properly wed. After settling in and washing off the trail dust, they walked to the mayor's house as the last light faded from the sky. Samuel Garrett proved to be a tall man in his early 40s with an air of practical authority. He listened intently as they explained their situation, asking occasional questions about Quinton's carpentry experience and Josephine's teaching credentials. "This is excellent news," Garrett said when they finished. "We have 23 children in Cedar Falls in need of regular schooling, and Miss Orton, your qualifications are more than adequate. As for you, Mr. Steele, I would like to see examples of your work, but based on what you have described, you are exactly the kind of skilled craftsman we need." He leaned back in his chair. "I can offer Miss Orton a salary of $30 per month to start, with room and board included. For Mr. Steele, I would propose hiring you to build the new schoolhouse on a contract basis, and once that is complete, I am confident you would have steady work from other residents. Does that sound acceptable?" Quinton and Josephine exchanged glances. It was more than they had hoped for. "Very acceptable," Quinton said, "but we have one request. We would like to be married as soon as possible. Tomorrow, if Reverend Thomas is available." Garrett smiled. "I think that can be arranged. Let me send my son to fetch the Reverend, and we will see what he says." Reverend Thomas arrived within the hour, a portly man with a cheerful disposition. He agreed immediately to perform the ceremony the following afternoon, suggesting they hold it in the church with any townspeople who wished to attend welcome to observe. "It is not often we have a wedding in Cedar Falls," he said happily. "It will be a lovely way to welcome you both to the community." They walked back to the boarding house in a state of dazed happiness. At the door, Quinton caught Josephine's hand. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted, "but in a good way. What about you?" "The same." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a week ago. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, Josephine. For seeing something worth saving underneath all the walls I had built." "Thank you for tearing those walls down," she replied. "For choosing connection over isolation, even though it frightened you. That took real courage." They stood together in the cold night air, unwilling to separate despite the late hour and the propriety they were supposedly maintaining. Finally, Josephine went inside, and Quinton returned to his own room, counting down the hours until he could call her his wife. The next day dawned clear and bright, winter sunshine turning the snow-covered valley into a field of diamonds. Josephine spent the morning with Mrs. Fletcher, who insisted on helping her prepare for the wedding. The boarding house keeper produced a beautiful blue dress that had belonged to her daughter, altered to fit Josephine's frame with quick, expert stitching. "Every bride deserves to look special, Mrs. Fletcher declared, weaving wildflowers that someone had preserved from summer into Josephine's hair. Meanwhile, Quinton visited the general store where Martin Cooper measured him for a new shirt and pressed him about his carpentry skills. By the time Quinton left, he had not only purchased proper wedding clothes but also secured commitments from 3 different families who wanted furniture built. The ceremony took place at 2 o'clock in the small church. Half the town seemed to have turned out, curious about the newcomers and eager for any excuse for celebration. Reverend Thomas stood at the front, beaming, while Josephine walked down the aisle on Mayor Garrett's arm, since she had no father present to do the honors. Quinton waited at the altar, his heart thundering as he watched her approach. She looked radiant in the blue dress, her auburn hair glowing in the light streaming through the church windows, her green eyes locked on his. When she reached him and took his hand, he felt the now familiar warmth spread through him. chasing away the last remnants of the cold isolation he had carried for so long. Reverend Thomas led them through the vows, and Quinton spoke his with absolute conviction. When it came time to kiss his bride, he did so tenderly, mindful of their audience but unable to hide the depth of his feeling. The congregation erupted in applause, and for the first time in 8 years, Quinton Steele felt like he belonged somewhere. The townspeople hosted a reception in the church hall, producing food and music and well wishes in abundance. Quinton and Josephine moved through the gathering together, meeting neighbors and accepting congratulations, their hands linked as if neither could bear to let go. As evening fell, they walked back to the boarding house where Mrs. Fletcher had prepared a special room for them, the largest in the establishment with a fireplace already burning warmly. She pressed a key into Josephine's hand with a knowing smile and left them alone. Inside, Quinton stood awkwardly until Josephine laughed and pulled him toward the fire. "Come here, husband," she said, the words sounding sweet on her lips. "We have spent enough time being nervous around each other." He went to her willingly, gathering her into his arms with growing confidence. They stood wrapped together, swaying slightly while the firelight flickered around them. "I love you," Quinton said, the words emerging with surprising ease. "I know it has only been a few days, but I do. I love you, Josephine Steele." She smiled up at him, her eyes shining. "I love you too. And I know we are going to be very happy here." She was right. The weeks and months that followed proved it beyond any doubt. Quinton threw himself into building the new schoolhouse with the focused intensity he had once reserved for gun practice. His hands, so long trained for violence, remembered the careful precision of carpentry as if no time had passed at all. The building rose under his skilled attention, solid and beautiful, with windows that let in maximum light and desks. He crafted himself with smooth surfaces perfect for young students. Josephine began teaching in the church while construction continued, quickly winning over her students and their parents with her combination of firm discipline and genuine warmth. She taught reading and arithmetic, history and science, adapting her lessons to meet each child where they were. In the evenings, she would tell Quinton stories about her day, about breakthroughs and challenges, and he would listen with rapt attention, falling more in love with her enthusiasm and dedication. They rented a small house on the edge of town, furnished gradually with pieces Quinton built in his spare time. Each item was crafted with care: a kitchen table with turned legs, chairs with carved backs, a bed frame that fit together with perfect joinery requiring no nails. He built Josephine a desk for her lesson planning and himself a workbench for the shed behind the house. And one evening, 3 months after their arrival in Cedar Falls, he presented her with a box. It was made of cherry wood, polished until it glowed in the lamplight. The lid was carved with roses, delicate and intricate, each petal distinct. Josephine gasped when she saw it, running her fingers over the carving. "Quinton, it is beautiful," she breathed. "Is there a secret compartment?" He showed her the hidden catch, the way a gentle press on one of the roses caused a false bottom to spring open, revealing a small space beneath. Inside that space, he had placed a letter he had written, telling her everything he felt about their life together, words he sometimes struggled to say aloud. Josephine read it with tears streaming down her face, then kissed him with such fierce tenderness that he forgot to be surprised by the intensity of his own emotional response. Later, lying together in the bed he had built, she told him she was pregnant. The news filled Quinton with a terror and joy so intertwined he could not separate them. He had lost his family once in fire and chaos. The thought of creating a new family, of having people who depended on him, brought back all the old fears of loss. But Josephine held him through the panic, reminding him gently that love always carried risk, and the alternative was no life at all. "We will face whatever comes together," she promised. "You are not alone anymore, Quinton. You will never be alone again." Their son was born in late autumn, arriving with healthy lungs and a shock of dark hair. They named him James, after Josephine's father, and his middle name was Robert, after Quinton's grandfather. When the midwife placed the baby in Quinton's arms for the first time, he looked down at the tiny, perfect face and felt something fundamental slot into place inside him. This was what he had been running from all those years. Not the possibility of loss, but the overwhelming responsibility of love. And now, holding his son while his wife watched with exhausted happiness, he understood that the responsibility was not a burden. It was a gift. The years flowed forward like a river finding its course. James grew into a bright, curious boy who loved both books and building things, inheriting traits from both parents. 2 years after James, they had a daughter they named Alina, who was fierce and fearless from the moment she entered the world. The schoolhouse became a center of the community, and Josephine's reputation as an excellent teacher spread to neighboring towns. Quinton's carpentry business flourished. He built houses and barns, furniture and wagons, even a new facade for the church when the original began to show its age. His work became known for its quality and craftsmanship, and people would travel from other settlements to commission pieces from him. But he never forgot where he had come from, the violence and loneliness that had defined him for so long. He made sure to be present for his children, to teach them not just skills but values, to show them through action what it meant to choose connection over isolation. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinton took Josephine back to the ridge above Cedar Falls where they had first seen the town. It was summer now, the valley green and lush, wildflowers blooming in riotous color. They sat together on the hillside, watching their children play nearby, and Quinton marveled at the improbability of it all. "What are you thinking about?" Josephine asked, leaning against his shoulder. "How different my life would be if you had not held my hand that day in Taylorsville," he said. "How close I came to riding right past the best thing that ever happened to me." "But you did not ride past," Josephine pointed out. "You came back. You chose this, chose us." "That matters more than you know. I chose you," Quinton corrected. "Everything else followed from that." She smiled and laced her fingers through his, the gesture as natural now as breathing, though he never took it for granted. "We chose each other. Against all logic and common sense, we looked at each other and decided to take a chance. I will never regret that, Quinton. No matter what else happens, I will never regret choosing you." They sat in companionable silence, watching James show Alina how to identify different types of wildflowers, listening to their children's laughter ring across the valley. Below them, Cedar Falls continued its daily rhythms, smoke rising from chimneys, people moving through the streets, the life of a community unfolding in all its ordinary, beautiful complexity. Quinton thought about the cold cowboy who had ridden into Taylorsville 10 years ago, armored in isolation and convinced that distance was safety. That man seemed like a stranger now, someone Quinton barely recognized. Josephine had reached through all his defenses with a simple gesture of human connection. And in doing so, she had saved him from a half-life of empty survival. He had not touched anyone before her. Now he could not imagine a day without contact. Josephine's hand in his children climbing into his lap, the casual embrace of friendship and community. The physical connection was important, but it was what the touch represented that mattered most. Trust, vulnerability. The willingness to let someone matter enough to hurt you, because the alternative was never letting them matter at all. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, they gathered their children and walked back down to town. James held Quinton's hand while Alina insisted on being carried by Josephine. They made their way through familiar streets, exchanging greetings with neighbors, stopping briefly at the general store where Martin Cooper's grandson now worked behind the counter. At home, Josephine made dinner while Quinton helped the children wash up. They ate together at the table he had built, talking about their days, making plans for tomorrow. After the children were in bed, Quinton and Josephine sat on their front porch in the gathering darkness, watching fireflies blink in the summer night. "I have been thinking," Josephine said eventually. "Next year, when Alina is a bit older, I would like to visit Taylorsville. Show the children where we met, maybe even see if that saloon is still standing." "That sounds good," Quinton agreed. "It would be interesting to go back, see how much has changed. If Dutch is still bartending, he will never believe the cold cowboy got married and had children." Josephine laughed softly. "You are not that man anymore." "No," Quinton agreed. "I am not, thanks to you." "Thanks to us," she corrected, echoing her words from the hillside. "We built this life together, Quinton, every piece of it." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Together," he agreed. "Always together." The years continued their steady progression. James grew tall and thoughtful, deciding eventually to follow in his mother's footsteps as a teacher. Alina proved to have her father's gift for working with her hands, though her passion was metalwork rather than carpentry. She apprenticed with the blacksmith and eventually took over his business when he retired. Quinton and Josephine grew older together, their hair graying, their movements slowing, but their love deepening with each passing season. They became fixtures of Cedar Falls, the carpenter and the teacher who had arrived as strangers and built a legacy that would outlast them both. The schoolhouse Quinton had constructed continued to educate generation after generation of children. The furniture he had made filled dozens of homes, each piece a testament to skill and care. On their 40th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren in the house where they had built their life, Josephine took Quinton's hand just as she had done so many years ago in a cold Utah street. "I would do it all again," she said softly. "Every moment, every choice, every risk. I would choose you every single time." Quinton looked at their joined hands, wrinkled now but still fitting together perfectly. He thought about the terrified young man he had been, the one who believed that never touching anyone would keep him safe from hurt. He had been so wrong. The hurt had come anyway, as it always did in life. But alongside it had come joy and love and meaning, and those things made every moment of vulnerability worthwhile. "I never wanted to let go of your hand," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "From that very first moment, I never wanted to let go. And I never will." Their family surrounded them with warmth and laughter, multiple generations bearing witness to a love story that had started with the simplest of gestures and grown into something that would echo through time. The cold cowboy who never touched anyone had become a man who understood that connection was not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. Outside, the sun set over Cedar Falls, casting long shadows across a town that had welcomed two strangers and watched them build a life beyond anything either had imagined possible. And inside, surrounded by the evidence of that life, Quinton and Josephine held hands and knew that every choice, every risk, every moment of courage that brought them together had been worth it. They had found each other against all odds, two lonely souls who dared to reach out despite their fears. And in reaching, in holding on, in refusing to let go, they had discovered that love was not something that happened to you. It was something you chose, day after day, moment after moment, hand in hand. Their story was not about perfection or ease. It was about the courage to be vulnerable, to let someone matter, to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of the past. The cold cowboy had learned to touch again, had learned that his hands could create and hold and cherish just as effectively as they had once wielded violence. The lonely teacher had found a home not in a place, but in a person, in the steady presence of someone who saw her clearly and loved her completely. Together, they had proven that it was never too late to change, never too late to choose connection over isolation, never too late to reach out your hand and find someone ready to hold on and never let go. As darkness fell completely and their family gradually dispersed to their own homes, Quinton and Josephine remained on the porch, hands clasped, hearts full, surrounded by the tangible evidence of a life well lived and a love that had transformed them both. The stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed a cold cowboy ride into Taylorsville all those years ago, and a brave woman extend her hand in simple greeting. Those stars had seen everything that followed, the risks and rewards, the fears overcome, the family built from hope and determination. And if stars could speak, they might have said that this was what mattered most in the end. Not the grand gestures or dramatic moments, but the quiet choice to hold someone's hand and refuse to let go. To build a life together, one day at a time, one touch at a time, one moment of courage at a time. That was the real story, the one worth telling, the one that would endure long after the last echoes of their lives had faded into memory. Quinton and Josephine sat together in the darkness, and they held hands and they were home.